Opposite from me is Ricke Williams. Ricke is the Deputy Director of Progress 2050, which is a project of the Center for American Progress, developing ideas for an increasingly diverse America. Ricke was listed by Politico.com as one of the top 50 politicos to watch. Then next to her is Monica Novoa. Monica is the coordinator of the Drop the I Word campaign. Some of you will be checking that out, hopefully all of you. It's our campaign to take the language of illegality out of the immigration debate. Good, thank you. And then right here we have Ricke Mananzala. Ricke is just finishing up a stint as co-director of FIERCE. FIERCE has an acronym that no one uses anymore, but the word fabulous is in it. Ricke was the campaign coordinator there until 2008 when he became the executive director. Here's how this conversation is going to work. Each person is going to have roughly 1 minute to pose a question to everybody else. Everybody else is going to have 2 minutes exactly to respond to that question. I'm going to run the timer on my phone. When it goes off, people will wrap up their responses so that I don't have to, like, in an undignified manner, wave like a sheet of paper around in front of them that says wrap up. Okay, so that's the way we're going. Melissa, do you want to ask the first or the last question?
I think the last.
The last, absolutely. Okay, so then we are going to go in alphabetical order, and Monica's going to go first and pose the first question. And you have like 10 seconds to think it through while I set up the stopwatch.
So I think that first I want to say that the reference that you made to Eeyore really got me thinking. And for the Drop the I Word campaign, I think we want to be more like really politically savvy Tiggers. Yes. So we want to be really excited and we want to be really pumped about the change that can really happen. And it's really exciting. You know, this campaign is really an extension of the mission of ARC and Color Lines, which is to arm people with the tools they need to make racial justice. And so we have all of these great opportunities ahead of us. So how do we talk about race head on? Because nobody's talking about the Canadian border or getting the European illegals out of here. And so we have a really great opportunity to really face that. They're talking about brown people. When Michelle Obama went to Maryland and that little girl asked her where her mother's papers were, I think that moment really brought that home for everyone. So people will know what we're talking about when we tell them to drop this word. And so I had a lot of points that I wanted to make, but I think the question that I want to pose is, how do we recognize this history that's been telling people from all over the world? As you know, this country's always been in a state of becoming, but the question has always been posed: who belongs here and who doesn't? So how do we answer these questions together, and how do we build an authentic understanding and authentic engagement around dropping the I word? How do we do this together? How do we get folks involved?
Great, thank you. We're going to go in this order. I think Ricky's going to go first, then Ricke, and then Melissa, and your responses. 2 minutes.
Is anyone else wearing their parka right now or forgot to pack it? I just had to ask that. Don't start my 2 minutes. And so the shaking won't be from my nervousness, clearly is going to be because I'm so cold. So it's so pleasant to sit next to you. It is.
Because she's hot, right?
Right, I know. All right, we're good now. And now we've started. Okay, so I think just on this question, I guess my entry point into thinking about language is really thinking about where can we forge alliances of commonality, right? And not everybody is going to have the same racial experience, and as Melissa pointed out, the same experiences across gender and sexual orientation. And so I think my entry point into this conversation around language, commonality, and how to truly talk about race among other forms of oppression is really highlighted through my work at FIERCE, which, in case you didn't know, I heard a lot of cheering, thank you. Fabulous is in the name, but to be more clear about what FIERCE is, we're explicitly a lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender youth of color community-based organization based in New York City. We consider ourselves a part of the racial justice movement and a part of the LGBT justice movement. And so for Fierce, a lot of struggle we've had in our work and thinking about language commonality, it has really been about having to struggle across the range of identities and communities we belong to. And I would say my answer to this question in our experience at Fierce is largely trying to forge kind of cross-issue-based campaigns that aren't easy, that are about trying to say, well, what is my experience of racial oppression in this moment, but actually, and how can I complicate this and say, by the way, the police are not only targeting me because I'm brown or black, but also because I'm trans or because I'm gay and they think I'm a sex worker on this street here in this neighborhood that I'm not supposed to be in. And so in our experience of trying to find how to talk about race and complicate it with gender, class, and sexuality has largely been in our experience through struggling across these issues, policies, and campaigns with other communities that we are told that, even though we know this is not true, that we don't have natural alliances with. And I want to talk about that a little bit later.
Great. 16 seconds to spare. Nice job.
I'll take it. First of all, it's an honor to be up here with you all. There was so much meaty and juicy content in the presentation that I want to get to later, but just to really quickly answer that question, I think we have to be careful about saying that these conversations aren't happening, because the really exciting part of the way that our communities organize is that the conversations are happening. The problem is that they're not being mainstreamed enough. They're not being broadcast enough. And so, if you turn on MSNBC and anyone is on the screen other than Professor Harris-Lacewell, you're not hearing the conversations. But if you look at my Twitter feed, people are talking about it all day long. If you go into any neighborhoods and you go into any organizers, any organizing conventions, you hear these conversations. And so I think the real challenge is, how do we elevate them? How do we magnify them and amplify them across the country and to platforms and audiences that may not be familiar with the way that we talk about communities of color, the way that we talk about social justice? And so by mainstreaming, I don't mean water it down. I don't mean that we strip it of the things that might make some other folks uncomfortable, but how do we get our speakers and our content in front of other audiences? And so part of that is using the power of the internet. I work a lot with young people, the millennial generation, and we are amazingly adept at being able to figure out how to get our content and our messages out to broader audiences. So I think for the campaign, one recommendation, obviously, that you already know, is to use social media and then to leverage that social media to get into the mainstream media to have these conversations magnified.
Great.
That was quick.
That was good. See, we like timing things.
Well, so actually, I would pick up on that a bit. So this is my political science hat that says, part of what I think sometimes happens when we're doing the work of anti-racism and racial justice is that we want to convince the whole group of people out there who disagree with us to agree with us. And one of the things that the right figured out some time ago is they just declared themselves a majority even when they weren't, right? So when you had the moral majority, that's just in fact not true. They were not a majority even by their definition of morality, much less by the much more expansive definition of morality we might have in this context. So part of what you have to do is not so much, although it's always nice to bring in and recruit new folks, but it's to activate the group of people who share some set of beliefs, but for whom it's simply not yet important enough. It's not yet relevant enough. So I think this in part goes to your point that there are these conversations happening. How do we elevate them? That similarly there are allies, but the work is trying to figure out how to make that alliance one that is politically relevant, one on which they will make policy choices, one on which they will vote. It's one of the things that we see in the difference, for example, between pro-choice and pro-life voters. Pro-life voters are often willing to be single-issue voters, to vote even against their party on issues of abortion, whereas pro-choice voters tend to be much less willing to be single-issue voters. Because they're less willing to be single-issue voters, they're much more willing to choose a candidate from their party who does not agree with them. Now, I'm not suggesting, for example, that we ought to make abortion a single-issue litmus test, but only that it is indicative that part of what you need to do is not so much a discursive strategy that convinces those who don't agree with you, but a discursive strategy that makes particularly relevant for the political arena those who have some alliance already with you.
Great, thank you. Erica, I'm going to have you ask the second question, and then Monica will start with your response. Monica, Rickie, Melissa. Melissa will always go last.
Sure. I'll actually kind of pull off of what I was just speaking about, the millennial generation, and I'm really fascinated by this idea that we see race differently. And that's kind of this meme that you've heard over and over again, that the millennials see race in different ways, that we appreciate diversity more. I hate this word, but that we're more tolerant. But I also think there's been very little analysis on, okay, we know that it's different, but as you said in your speech, different isn't always necessarily better. And so what is it? How do we see race? And so I wanted to know, are you seeing in any of your work the manifestation of really deep intergenerational dialogues that will kind of pull some of these questions out? How are generations seeing race differently, and what does that mean for the national discourse on race?
Great, thank you. Monica?
So I think that with the I Word campaign, this presents one of the really great opportunities to educate folks on the history of how language has impacted. I'm sorry.
Policy.
About how language has impacted policy, about how it's happened in different communities, and how we can connect that to the work that's happening today.
Next, so I think at Fierce, you know, just on this question of young people being the kind of moral, no one's going to want to say this, but I'm going to say it, the moral high ground that young people can stake that in any social movement right now. You're talking about immigration, right? The New York Times really putting out a number of articles around young people and their thoughts on, as Arizona SB 1070 was happening, what's their thoughts about immigration reform, you know, as opposed to their parents or grandparents. Really, really different. Also true, clearly, in discussions about race and as well as sexuality. The same thing is true around young people's opinions about marriage equality, among other LGBT rights issues, compared to their parents and grandparents. And so where's race in this? I think particular to New York, and I will talk about our LGBTQ youth of color membership, who are supposed to have and do have, I think, very nuanced understandings of race. I'm going to be honest with you all, got very interesting in New York. Raise your hand if you're in New York. From New York, familiar with New York politics, love you. All right, so, and I love everybody else too.
Equal opportunity.
Right, exactly. But this debate around whether or not New York City will allow the building of a mosque at Ground Zero. On 9/11, was anyone at those protests, heard about them? Huge, right? And so when we're bringing up this topic of conversation with our membership, very few of them, although there are some, very few identify as Muslim. And so this conversation about race got even more complicated when we entered in with religion, and we entered in with a lot of young people whose family members were restaurant workers and, you know, other forms of jobs in at the World Trade Center. And so I think conversation about race among young people, assuming that it's always, you know, we're all on the same page, is not true. And I think you've highlighted some of this, that being different isn't necessarily always good. I think what we're learning at Fierce is that, in fact, while race is still central to kind of our identities and the racial justice work that we do, that there's still a lot longer, far more complicated conversations we need to be having, including this most recent conversation about Islamophobia and race in the media.
Right, thank you.
So I could go on about this one all day, and probably because I find myself in a weird generational transitional moment. We had it at the table, where my father, who's a longtime college professor, 30-some-odd years, says it's important to remember that when you first start teaching as a college professor, you are the hip young professor, right? So you come in and you're making all these cultural references, and the students get it, and you're the hip young professor. And when you retire from teaching, you have to be the distinguished elder professor, right? And so somewhere along the way, you have to make the transition. If you make it too soon, you're kind of stodgy. Like, why are you, you know, three-piece suiting it at 30? Like, it's not quite. But if you make it too late, it's kind of pathetic, right? So you have to make the transition from hip young professor to elder statesman professor at some point. So I find myself, like, shockingly making that transition much more quickly than I had expected, in part because the freshmen, they were born in 1990 or 92 or something, like, just ignorant.
Yeah.
Like, how is that? They look, yeah, 90 or juniors, right? Yeah, it's what? Like, how could you have been born in the 90s? Like, I think people born in the 90s and they're in college. So when you ask about the generational divide, I think of myself as, yes, us young people, we are young. But then I realize apparently not, because you just shoved me in the other category talking about your research work earlier. Okay, and I'm also the parent of a kid. So I'd say a couple of things. One, the first thing is that in fact, as a matter of empirics, younger generations are composed of a different group of people than older generations are. They are browner, they are more likely to be first generation American, they are more likely to speak multiple languages in their households and in their schools, they are more likely to be out if they are in fact gay. So we know that as a matter of composition that youth are in a different place than older generations. On the other hand, any notion that this happens just as a matter of generational replacement is clearly false. And this is why they are attacking multicultural education in Arizona and Texas. Because this is not, the change is not just demographic, because certainly people of color can be as regressive as any other group of people, right? Which would be white people, I guess. Right, and so just generational replacement doesn't do it. The reason that this generation is different was because we had active social movements that changed the kind of schools that young people went to, that changed the kind of neighborhoods where they live, and that changed the kind of school books that they read, and changed the kind of television. I mean, none of that just happened. It all happened as a result of struggle. So the reason that the right is currently attacking precisely these questions, so Texas is voting on taking Islam out of the textbooks because there's so much Islam in the textbooks. And so all of this is happening largely as a result of their recognition that you can certainly turn back the clock on these transitions. Yeah.
So as I like to say, identity doesn't always equal politics, and you have to actually have the structures to insert the politics. Ricke, last question, or not last question, third question, okay. And we're going to go Erica, Monica, and Melissa. Go ahead.
So I wasn't going to do it, but I decided to do it. I'm going to talk about gay marriage. I'm going to do it. And so first I'll start with it. Really love what you were saying around queer rights, or the LGBT movement, really staking itself as not wanting to be the same, but wanting to be like treated just fine because we are different. I totally agree with that, and I'll start with a quote by a favorite person of mine who was just here facilitating a pre-conference meeting with ARC, as well as the Arcus Foundation on LGBT rights and racial justice, Ju Hyun Kang, and she said, something in the vein of, I was excited about being queer because I never would have to get married. I'll just start there, and hopefully that helps you understand my politics and how I feel about gay marriage as an out person. So let's rewind to set the stage for my question. I know I'm ticking down. So 2008, the last Facing Race conference in California, right? Right after the elections, first black president. What else happened that time?
Prop 8.
Prop 8. Raise your hand if you're in California, from California. Quite a few of you. I love you too. I was born in Oakland. And
30 seconds.
Okay. And so at the same time, May 15th, which just so happens to be my birthday, gay marriage was legalized in California, right? And right during the elections, Prop 8, which was a constitutional amendment that was put out to voters to say, no more gay marriage, just kidding. At the same time, voters went out en masse to elect Barack Obama. What was the media story at first?
Black people did it.
Black people did it. They did it, right? People of color must have gone en masse to the polls to vote for Barack Obama and then vote against gay marriage. Again, eventually found out it wasn't true. So my question is, because I'm running out of time, there's lots of things that we can learn from Prop 8, right? That there's racism embedded in the mainstream LGBT movement, clearly within the media, that there is some questions around organizing strategy around this particular loss. So what are the necessary ingredients for forging more authentic and effective collaborations between LGBT organizations and racial justice organizations? And to be clear, I'm not saying how can racial justice organizations get us gay marriage. Cool.
Very good. Erica.
All right. I think I'll take it. There's so many pieces of that answer. I think I'll just, since I have a minute and a half, I think I'll stick with kind of the tactical piece and what it means to engage certain constituencies. I saw it on Twitter earlier today. I don't remember who said it in one of the sessions. Actually, it might have been you, Rinku, when you were saying that outreach is different. That there's a key thing difference between outreach and equity and organizing and justice, and that trying to just get certain communities involved in certain campaigns at the time in which you need them is ineffective and short-sighted and won't last, disingenuous. We can go on and on. So I think part of the key there is forging relationships not at crunch time, but like figuring out how do we develop relationships and have ongoing conversations before it's time to pass a bill. When we're not under attack, and for most of us we're kind of always under attack in some regard, but when there's not kind of this emergency situation where we have to go grabbing for as many partners as we can possibly find. And so there's this ongoing, and in particular looking at how young people are organizing, I'm seeing that happening quite a bit on the ground, where there's this idea of how do we organize and talk about issues that are meaningful to you and meaningful to me, and then maybe find someone that, some issues that are meaningful to both of us, and talk about them in an ongoing way. How can I contribute my unique gifts and talents and skills and capacities to the movement? Not your movement, but the movement. And I think when you see that happening, then the next time there is another campaign, the next time you will have those relationships deeply grounded and built already. Thank you.
I would absolutely agree with that. I think that's right. With immigration, with the immigrant rights movement, and a lot of the DREAM activism that's been happening in the past couple of years, we've kind of looked at what the framing has been around how families are defined and how families are composed and are just different than what we would think that the base is. So I think a lot of that is storytelling. It's sharing stories about families that are not, families that are different, families that look like the people who are here. And so it's sharing stories and elevating that and making it more integrated.
Well, yeah, and as you know, obviously this is has been a central part of my work and my writing and my talking. I guess I'd say a couple of things. One, it is not a question of how to get black communities on board with LGBT efforts. Black communities and LGBT communities and brown communities and LGBT communities they're the same. They're not some other places. They're the same. Homophobia is killing black folks. Now, I don't know, it's possible that homophobia is also killing Latino communities, I'm not sure, but it certainly is killing black folks. And it is killing us in a number of ways. Not only does homophobia kill us through our complete incapacity and just paralyzing fear for 20 years of addressing the HIV crisis in the community, because we were so certain that HIV was indicative of gay identity and that gay identity was in and of itself anti-black, and so we just could not cope, right? So not only like in that way, but it kills the very spirit of who we are as a people, because we allow ourselves to look at the people that we love and not see them. Over and to willfully look at people we love and pretend we do not see them, and to shove the people we love into closets over and over again. And that is death to the core of who we are as a people. And so homophobia must be solved within our communities. Now, you know, I am the auntie of a proud, butch, out lesbian who was right here in Chicago in an elite private school, so harassed over her identity, her queer identity, that she had to escape to a public school in order to be safe. I mean, literally, her life was threatened. The administration did nothing. And this is a private school that has quite a national reputation, because there's this guy who's in office whose kids used to go there. So. So what I know for certain is that those identities, the melding of them, again, can mean danger. Now, I thought that I had been cured of marriage by divorce. I felt cured. It turns out I was just in remission. It has come back with a vengeance. I'm actually getting married in a week. And so I suppose, and the very fact that people clap is kind of a funny thing, right? Like, PhD, that's nice. Tenure at Princeton, good job. Marriage, and he's black too. I'm marrying a black man. Okay, it's very odd to watch the reaction, but I suppose what I know about that is that it is precisely my ability, my freedom, my privilege to just choose, to just on one day just opt into or out of with no need to have a conversation with the state about it, with no need to have anyone vote on it, with no need, if it fails, to feel that I have failed my community, my identity, that it's just that it is a perfectly, it is a position of such enormous privilege. And I figured that since gay people so want to get married, and gays are such good trendsetters, that marriage must be good. So, so you totally don't have to. I might. My only point here is that the question of the mixed or joint efforts is that it's not one on behalf of the other. It is that it is the same effort, and that the fact is there was a time when a black woman in a black woman's body couldn't just opt into and out of marriage, and the idea that it could never, that marriage is in fact a basic civil right is the reason that it matters, not because marriage is good, but because it is a civil right, and because it is a civil right, it matters.
Great, thank you. We're running a little bit late. We have to be out of this room by 3:10. So for the last round, I'm going to ask people to keep their responses to 1 minute instead of 2. So really, like, you know, follow Monica's lead on this one. And Melissa's going to ask the last question, and then as soon as Melissa's done, all of you need to, as soon as we're done, you need to not leave yet because Chris has announcements. You know, it's a conference, so just stay in your seats, even though we'll be wrapping up. All right, you're on.
So my last question is just the question that I had on this slide. If you could wave your magic wand, if you could make the world into what you would want it to look like, what are the outlines of what the world would look like? The king said that he had a vision at the end. And he said that he was taken to the mountaintop and allowed to see the promised land. But you will remember the king did not tell us what he saw. He just told us that he was allowed to see it. He did not fill in those outlines for us. And so I'm just sort of wondering if you could imagine what the promised land looks like. What does it look like?
Not it.
Monica's first, right?
Not it.
Okay, Monica, Erica, Ricke, I think that's going to be the order.
I think the promised land is a place where people can be their authentic selves, and that even when that causes challenges or discomfort, that there's a safe space in which to debate about it, and a safe space to have these conversations. And I think that's what we're looking for.
I would say that when people can analyze or look or view their identity as a luxury and not as a necessity, so that I don't have to think about my gender or race when thinking about access to health care and life expectancy, when I can view who I am as nothing more than a privilege.
When there's a lot of winners, right? That there are no losers, that this isn't about a zero-sum game to where like someone's got to win at someone else's expense, right? And so I think your point on to be a loser doesn't mean that the winner takes all, right? And so I think for me it's got to be that it's a win-win, there's no losers in this game, and that there's also a lot of fun, a lot of celebration, and a lot of opportunity for joy.
Great, thank you. A hand for Melissa Harris-Lacewell and our panel. Well done. Okay, Chris. Thanks. But don't leave the room.